This is Truth and Other Lies, Citizen Sovereign. If you know someone who prefers traveling in a conveyance to driving in a car, that person might be an adherent of the sovereign citizen movement. People who believe themselves capable of outmaneuvering judicial systems using loopholes in the United States Code and creative interpretations of the Constitution. They believe themselves to be beyond the law and think they can manipulate the law to affect that belief. Discover the origin and tactics of this peculiar ideology in Citizen Sovereign. I am Mark Jacobin along with my brother James, and this is Truth and Other Lies. James, what is your personal experience with the sovereign citizen movement, if any?
Well, I didn't realize I had any, Mark, until we got into the discussions about covering this on the Truth and Other Lies podcast. But as you were going through it with me, a word stuck out that you said that triggered a memory from my late teenage years of my first speeding ticket when I went down to the district court to plead not guilty, or at least tell them I don't have the money to pay this. And as you're sitting there in traffic court and there's many tickets heard ahead of yours, one of the people in the courtroom prior to my case being called for the traffic ticket pled not guilty by virtue of the fact that he wasn't driving, that he was just traveling. And it seemed odd to me at the time. But years and years and years later, I realized that that person is invoking his sovereign citizenship, because if you're not driving on the roads and you're traveling, you're not subject to the rules of the road, apparently.
Yes, and if you're not privy to the sovereign citizen movement, it can sound quite intriguing. I first heard about it in the 80s, and of course I was much younger then, and I thought, oh, here's someone who knows something I don't that could give me an advantage in society. I can get out of traffic tickets, I can avoid paying my taxes, I might even be able to get the government to pay off my loans for me by using these tricks and loopholes of the United States Code and the Uniform Commercial Code. It can be very appealing.
Well, as far as being very appealing, it certainly is, especially if you're a young person and you think, oh, there's these things I don't know about how society works, and basically I can get away with this and that, more or less.
Here's the secret knowledge. Here's the trick to getting ahead in society. This is what the millionaires and the billionaires and all the people in power know that you don't know, because everyone in the peasantry class, which is everyone listening within the sound of my voice, is always looking to how do I ascend those strata of society, get to the next level, make my life easier, as it were. And perhaps the sovereign citizen movement is the key to that success.
Certainly, but also, Mark, I would say that movement is very unknown. I think it's about to become a lot more known for different reasons. But when you first hear of it, you have a vague echo of, oh, I've heard of this somewhere, right? But you don't really know where. Can't put your finger on it. But someone always has a story about, oh, I know this person, or they're talking to you about some obscure law that could change your life forever. But once that conversation ends, you just move on with the rest of your day.
I guess they're doing a better job at being a secret society than, say, the Illuminati or the Masons.
I don't think the Masons are a secret society, and the Illuminati hasn't existed anywhere outside of Eastern Europe, well, ever. I did see Da Vinci Code. Anyway.
well, maybe that's what makes them so secret. We think they don't exist.
Well, here we go. Here we go. That's the aliens, Bob Lazar, and all back again.
Let's take a break and come back with more Citizen Sovereign. JacobinBrothers.com is the one and only place to find Jacobin Brothers content. Register at JacobinBrothers.com to gain access to all published episodes and bonus materials. Also included with your free membership to JacobinBrothers.com is Mark's blog, cartoons, quips, and Jacobinisms. Gain access to the Jacobin catalog, which includes hundreds of episodes from shows past and present. Discover what you've been missing at JacobinBrothers.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. Ain't actually is in the dictionary, but you still should not say it. Moore's Law has not been tested in the Supreme Court. Element 115 is found on Gilligan's Island of instability. Is this thing on? JacobinBrothers.com. 830 Jacobin. It's not a law, but it is a great idea. Call or text 830 Jacobin anytime. If we like what you have to say, we'll discuss your comments on the air. If we don't like what you have to say, you'll hear about that too. 830 Jacobin. It's not a law, but it should be. Welcome back to Truth and Other Lies, Citizen Sovereign. Freedom from income taxes, traffic citations, and mortgage payments are a few of the advertised benefits of being a sovereign citizen. Loopholes in the United States Code, the Uniform Commercial Code, and even the U.S. Constitution enable studious and astute individuals to leverage the laws of the United States against itself to effect the benefit of being a sovereign citizen. This exclusive club of 300,000 people has been growing in membership over the past 4 decades. James, what are some of the other exciting benefits of being a sovereign citizen?
Well, you don't have to pay traffic tickets. You don't have to recognize the United States government as an entity. You have special powers such as you have a secret bank account, I think, set up at the Treasury. You can pay bills with any currency you like. And if the person won't accept that currency, the bill is then waived. Sign me up, right? No taxes, don't pay your bills, don't abide by any law that you don't think is under the domain of the United States, which is none. So we're just freewheeling.
And like any mythology, there are different tellings of the story, and different people have different beliefs about what a sovereign citizen is. But the core belief of a sovereign citizen is that they are not subject to the jurisdiction of the federal government. In fact, they dismiss all levels of authority beyond the county sheriff. That's actually where this movement started, is that people said, well, the highest form of authority is the county sheriff, not the state police, not the state's state attorney, nothing at the federal government level. They said anything other than the sheriff is unconstitutional, which is rather ironic, James, when you consider that the Constitution doesn't mention the county sheriff anywhere.
Well, Mark, they don't just not recognize the federal government, because traffic court is not the federal government. It's not even the state government. It's your local county government, which actually would be the sheriff. And for instance, when you get a jury summons, it says from the office of the sheriff.
They do recognize that the government exists and that the local government is legitimate. What they don't recognize is the court's jurisdiction either over the subject matter, which is the traffic ticket, or the person or the parties involved, because they have these very narrow and specific interpretations of the law. And the law says, well, because of all these things, your jurisdiction doesn't apply to me. It's all very convoluted, and if you were to read their posts, you might think that it might even be legitimate.
This does get confusing to me quickly with the way the needle gets threaded, and there seems to not be a lot of consistency. A big thing that they don't recognize is traffic laws, and those are local indeed. And they don't want to pay traffic tickets, and everyone identifies with that. But if I went back 100 years and there's no cars and there's a horse, and they steal the horse, could they then say, I didn't steal the horse, I was just traveling with the horse? Or is this just a modern invention?
This is a modern invention.
Okay.
It's simply a way for them to declare that the court has no jurisdiction over them.
And the traffic ticket is the vehicle for that, if you will.
Right, or the conveyance, if you will. They have a couple of ways of interacting. Okay, they're accused of paper terrorism, which is they will file motions to burden down the courts. They will spend a lot of time making what the court believes are fallacious arguments, basically wasting the court's time. They believe in some very archaic concepts. They think that modern law doesn't apply to them. They believe that they are only governed by common law. Now, common law was the law that governed British subjects prior to the establishment of the United States of America and prior to some evolution in the government of the UK. One of them is the consent to prosecute. They believe if they don't give the courts their consent to be prosecuted, that they don't have to be prosecuted. And this is rather archaic because the courts have settled that 200 years ago. They believe that if they can creatively apply aspects of the Uniform Commercial Code into discharging their debts. A payment denied is a debt discharged, as they like to say, which means, like you said, they invent their own money. And if they try to pay a debt with money, they say, well, I tried to pay you with this money. And you say you don't accept it, so the debt is no longer valid. A modern belief is that everyone has a secret bank account maintained by the Treasury that has $630,000 in it. And by using certain words and filing certain paperwork, you can get access to that account and use that account to discharge your debts to the state and federal government, which would be mostly taxes and fines. They have interesting interpretations of the 14th Amendment. They think the 14th Amendment created a new class of citizen, a corporate entity that is owned by the corporate United States of America, which is different from the free nation of the United States of America. And if you participate in government, such as getting a driver's license, a marriage license, a birth certificate, then you are accepting the contract with the corporation of the United States of America, and you come under their jurisdiction. But you can sever your ties with that corporation of the United States of America by refusing to participate in society, by burning your birth certificate, getting rid of your Social Security card, abandoning your Social Security number, and by getting rid of these ties to the corporation of the United States of America, you can then reclaim your free natural person self, and your free natural person self is not subject to the jurisdiction of this United States of America corporation. Is that clear?
No, it's a word salad, but I'll take those in order. I want a $630,000 bank account, so I'm going to sign me up, please. And number two, the 14th Amendment was indeed meant to franchise people, right? And it was meant to do two things. One, outlaw chattel slavery in America once and for all in every state, and enfranchise Black Americans and make them full citizens. I've read the 14th Amendment numerous times. I can't find a reading in there that would support anything you said after that. I mean, I know you're not saying it yourself. You're saying this is what they think, but I don't understand where they get this from.
Right. No, I've done the same thing. I read it. I said, is there any wiggle room here at all for these kinds of interpretations? And I haven't found it. If you work in a federal institution such as the IRS or any governmental institution, you can recognize sovereign citizens by some of their behaviors. One of them is that they have strange beliefs about capitalization. They believe that when the government types their name in all capital letters, they're referring to this false person that was created by the 14th Amendment. And when they type your name in proper case, they're referring to you, the natural person. So uppercase Bob Jones is the straw man. Proper case Bob Jones would be the natural person. They have strange ways of signing their name. They'll put interesting punctuation such as colons or semicolons or hyphens to indicate that they're signing this as their natural self and not as their straw man self or straw person self.
That is unique, but also it's very confusing because it seems like there's so many characteristics that you're laying out here that I guess all of us can be sovereign citizens.
All of us are sovereign citizens, James. We've been just duped into becoming serfs of this corporation of the United States of America.
Well, I agree with that in part. The way they go about this is it's not just harassment. It's as if they're stalking and overwhelming the local municipalities with paperwork, frivolous liens against their fellow sovereign citizens. And they almost come off with the appearance of grifters. They just want to chip away and get the crumbs of these weird little loopholes, if the loopholes even exist.
Are they filing these motions to assert their sovereignty, or are they filing these motions as a way of gaming the system?
Well, in a way of deriving income that they claim doesn't exist, or a monetary system that they don't agree to. Because when you file liens and you look for financial remuneration, you're collecting an income if you prevail.
Right. Some other things they'll do is they'll sign their income taxes with strange things like filed under duress or I claim zero liability. And they do create a lot of extra work for the IRS because there is a line on the 1040 that says I'm declaring this information under penalty of perjury. And what happens is if you make any additions or modifications to that 1040 form that negate that statement from a legal perspective, you no longer have a valid claim and the IRS can't process it. And if they do, then the IRS is at fault. And so the IRS has to go through extra gyrations to figure out if you filed a valid claim. Here's a little secret, James. Whether or not you file a valid claim doesn't excuse you from the obligation of having to file a valid claim.
And the unintended consequence of that is that the IRS has to hire more employees, and those are federal employees, which they're actually making the federal government bigger. The same thing they don't recognize, they're empowering it more.
Exactly. There is a lot of circular logic going on. Let's take a break and come back and talk about the origins of the sovereign citizen movement.
Stone Forge.
Handcrafted, made to order carbon steel knives from Stone Forge at Facebook.com. Mention Cousin Eddie when you place your order and receive a 10% discount.
Stone Forge.
Whether you are preparing meals in the kitchen, in the field, or adding to your collection, a full-tang handcrafted knife from Stone Forge delivers the performance, presentation, and durability that you expect from premium cutlery.
Stone Forge.
Each knife is handcrafted from specialty carbon steel, then sharpened and polished by hand to deliver long-lasting performance, and includes a matching custom handle made from premium specie hardwood.
Stone Forge.
Also included with your purchase of a handcrafted carbon steel knife from Stone Forge is a unique leather sheath for safe handling and protection of your premium Stone Forge knife.
Stone Forge.
Custom carbon steel knives from Stone Forge make great gifts. Chefs, hunters, collectors, and enthusiasts alike all enjoy receiving their very own handcrafted knife from Stone Forge.
Stone Forge at Facebook.com.
All Stone Forge products are made in the USA. Product specifications may be limited by the laws of your jurisdiction. Get yours today by searching for Stone Forge at Facebook.com.
Stone Forge at Facebook.com.
Mention Cousin Eddie when you place your order and receive a 10% discount. Visit Stone Forge at Facebook.com.
Stone Forge at Facebook.com.
Welcome back to Truth and Other Lies, Citizen Sovereign. The Sovereign Citizens Movement begins in Wichita, Kansas in 1951, when building contractor Arthur Porth files suit to reclaim his income tax payment of $135. Arthur did not receive a favorable judgment, but he did spend the next 15 years traveling the country peddling his anti-tax rhetoric and inspiring a grassroots anti-tax movement. Arthur is eventually convicted of tax evasion in 1967. One of Arthur's disciples is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel William Potter Gale, a presumed one-time aide to General Douglas MacArthur. William Gale, an Episcopalian minister and later founder of his own churches, had published the book Racial and National Identity in 1951. Racial and National Identity presented an interpretation of Christian scriptures and historical references that conclude the divinely ordained supremacy of the white race. From this book and William's ministries and other writings arises the Christian identity movement. The anti-Jewish and white supremacist belief of Christian identity will be intertwined with the early history of the sovereign citizen movement. William Gale, in turn, inspires retired dry cleaning executive Henry Mike Beach to form the Citizens Law Enforcement Research Center in Portland, Oregon in 1969. Like William Gale's California Rangers, CLERC is a thinly veiled tax protest group. Mike Beach has a long history of associations with anti-Jewish and neo-Nazi groups. In 1973, Mike charters the Sheriff's Posse Comitatus and publishes the manifesto called Blue Book. By 1975, the more charismatic William Gale consolidates several paramilitary and tax protest groups into a national organization known as the Posse Comitatus based in Wisconsin. The anti-government philosophies of the Posse Comitatus spread throughout the country during the next decade, spawning chapters, offshoots, and adding to the mythology of the sovereign citizen. William Gale dies in prison in 1998, awaiting appeal of a 1987 conviction on tax-related charges. As the sovereign citizen movement reaches a broader audience, its racist underpinnings become diluted, but its adherents replace the religious fanaticism with more invented and pedantic tactics for harassing officials and convincing others of the veracity of their claims. The death of William Gale coincided with the decline of the popularity and influence of the Posse Comitatus. The 1990s brought an increase in violence associated with the sovereign citizen movement. The Oklahoma City bombing, the Montana Freeman standoff, and the Republic of Texas standoff were all connected to the sovereign citizen movement. In 1998, a William Gale associate and convict, Roger Elvick, invented the straw man technique, which dominated the notable events of the next 20 years. James, do you have anything to add to the origin and history of the sovereign citizen movement?
The origins of it are extraordinarily ugly and very ugly. It doesn't get more racist and bigoted and anti-Semitic than all of that. So it seems to have really just started over one guy's personal view of the world combined with the fact that he didn't want to pay taxes. This is where this all begins.
This is where it all begins. There are four phases of the sovereign citizen movement. So you have the 50s and 60s started with the anti-tax movement, and in a parallel track was the Christian identity movement, both starting in 1951, ironically. In the 70s, these two movements combined, the anti-tax movement and the Christian identity movement, combined into the Sheriff's Posse Comitatus in Oregon and offshoot groups. This developed through the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, the racist aspects fell away more or less, but in the 1990s, you had more incidents of violence associated with sovereign citizens. And by the 2000s, the sovereign citizen movement had mostly become a paper chase or acts of paper terrorism, as it's called. If you were to run into a sovereign citizen today, it's not likely that they would hold the same extreme racist beliefs that the folks of the 70s did, but they still have some rather interesting and perhaps not altogether true interpretations of the American judicial system.
So the modern 2021 sovereign citizen may not even know. Because look, if they've researched this the way they have, they've cherry-picked history for 200 years to get here, they may or may not know that they're signing off and joining a loose-knit organization of anti-Semitic white supremacists.
I would bet that most of them have no idea who William Potter Gale was. He was an associate of Richard Butler, who founded the Aryan Nations, which most people probably have heard of. There is some confusion over who actually founded Posse Comitatus, but I think when we look at the reality, there are two Posse Comitatus. There's a local Posse Comitatus that was formed by Mike Beach in Oregon, and then there was the national organization that William Gale created in Wisconsin. Most of this is overshadowed by these racial underpinnings. Mike Beach actually was a founder of a chapter of the Silver Shirts in the 1930s, and the Silver Shirts were inspired by the brown shirts of Nazi Germany.
Wow.
So when we say racists, we're talking about hardcore white supremacists.
Well, we're talking about genocidal racists. Richard Butler, getting back to him briefly, was a big proponent of the Turner Diaries. It's a book that was found in the possession of Timothy McVeigh when he was taken into custody after murdering 163 people in Oklahoma City in 1995. And Timothy McVeigh was definitely Christian identity. So we're not going back too far to have to find extreme violence and actual acts of terrorism associated with this kind of thinking.
You've had people murdered in the street as a result of the sovereign citizen movement. Outside of the Oklahoma City bombing, it's not any more or less deadly than any other extremist form of beliefs. You can find many other extreme groups out there that have committed violence and homicide. But the Oklahoma City bombing lifts this to the top of the chart in terms of violence.
Certainly, and also the types of people historically that are involved in this. I mean, Mark, I'd never heard of the silver shirts, but I think we've all heard of the brown shirts and the Nazis, and we know how that all ended. So the the origins of this and the tie-in to this. So in the 30s, if you had the silver shirts, and then you had Gale in the 60s, and then it changed again in the 70s. This whole thing from the very beginning has been rooted in the extreme of the extreme.
And part of their problem with paying taxes that they held the belief that those taxes didn't go to fund their local government or infrastructure, but it was all funneled into the global banking cabal, which was run by Jews.
Yeah, and this is what promulgates the ancient centuries old anti-Semitism, that the Jews run the banking system and so forth and so on. This is just kind of a more veiled way of saying the same thing.
So at its surface, you might think that these people are simply looking to regain their sovereign rights to push back against government overreach, and some people might think of that as a noble goal. But when you peel back the layers, you realize that these people espoused anti-Jewish beliefs and their behaviors reflected that.
Well, and they have a sense of grandiosity to them and purpose. And these people have been littered in positions of power, or at least tried to retcon history. Wasn't there an aide to General MacArthur who's heavily involved in this back in World War II?
Perhaps. William Potter Gale, who wrote the book A Racial and National Identity in 1951, presumably was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He served in the Philippines. He was an aide to General MacArthur, and he ran the guerrilla operations that softened up the Japanese for the return of General MacArthur to the Philippines during World War II. That's the story. However, the only source we have for that story is a book published by Sherry Seymour called Committee of the States Inside the Radical Right. This book was published in 1991. And guess who tells us all these great and wonderful things that William Potter Gale did?
William Potter Gale.
William Potter Gale. so, so a very circular reference. So I would simply write that off as an urban legend because we have no way of verifying it.
And then as far as the Blue Book goes, that's out of circulation at this point.
Out of circulation, I have not been able to find a copy of it, even on the internet where people are known for photocopying books and posting them online. It seems to be lost to history.
So in the timeline of this, by the time the 70s came around and society had started to change and you couldn't outwardly espouse anti-Semitic, genocidal, racist views, that you kind of had to couch it in different ways, and that kind of just became kind of where they started talking about it more as, well, we're not really citizens. We're not against this or that. We're just for the fact that we're sovereign citizens and we're not a part of this the corporation of America.
Right. They were separatists in the truest definition of the word. Let's take a break and come back with more Citizen Sovereign. Find your favorite Jacobin Brothers merchandise at shop.jacobinbrothers.com. T-shirts, hats, and beverage conveyances, all branded with your favorite Jacobin Brothers logo. You'll be shocked by how much smarter you sound debating your friends while wearing official Jacobin Brothers apparel. Shop.jacobinbrothers.com. Welcome back to Truth and Other Lies, Citizen Sovereign. For all of the wiles and cogitations of the sovereign citizen movement, their position is not entirely devoid of merit. Some of the grievances of sovereign citizens are legitimate and shared by other more widely recognized organizations. Number one on their list is what I call the lost clause of the First Amendment, the right to petition and redress the government. Number two, lack of accountability of the Federal Reserve System. Number three, appropriation of the grand jury by the bureaucracy and the autocratic prosecutorial discretion. Number four, the design flaw in the application of liens and their bias toward businesses. Guilty until proven innocent. Number five, qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is, of course, a legitimate grievance that we have covered at length in Truth and Other Lies episode 2027, License to Murder. James, which of these legitimate grievances should we discuss in detail?
Well, there's quite a few on there. Let's go with the right to petition the government, because this is a civics issue. And this is how it seems that this is not a loophole, but it's a very lesser known aspect of the First Amendment. Of course, the First Amendment is the right to speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition the government. So let's start with that. What is the right to petition the government?
I'm not aware of any statutes or case law that reinforce or define what the right to petition the government really means.
Well, the Supreme Court held a long time ago that you do have the right to petition the government, and they listed a few things: protest, writing letters, things of that nature. But it's never come back for a Supreme Court ruling on two aspects. Number one, does the government have to get back to you? The government always does, for the most part, if you write a letter to your congressman or your local mayor or whatever, but they don't have to do it in a timely manner. So it is vague. And so it seems like the sovereign citizen group, if you will, has stepped into this void, this vague, not clearly defined right to petition the government, and declared how they're going to petition the government, and then stated declaratively that this is how you do it.
Furthermore, I think what the Supreme Court failed to define is what the government's responsibility is in effecting redress, right? Just because you have the right to write a letter, then they have to respond. How much effort do they have to put into that response, and how can you be guaranteed that you got appropriate redress? Now, redress doesn't mean that the government's going to do what you want them to do, but it means the problem has to be contemplated and a conclusion reached in all fairness.
I'll give a simple example. You live in a small town, and you want to park your car with no wheels in your front yard. You get a notice saying, please remove your car from the front yard. You write into your local government and say, hey, why do I have to remove my car with no wheels from the front yard? It's my yard. And then they send you a letter back eventually and says, statute 243 of the local code says you can't have a disabled vehicle in your front yard. So they have redressed your grievance. You just didn't get the answer you wanted.
What if I don't like the ordinance that says I can't have a disabled vehicle in my front yard?
Well, depending on where you live, you have a couple of options. If you live in a state like Washington, you can get enough signatures to get that on the ballot as an initiative that the people can vote on. If you live in a state that doesn't offer the initiative, you can go to your city council and seek to get the majority of your city council members to propose a statute that says you can park a car in your front yard. And if you get enough of your neighbors and fellow citizens to ask for that, and you get the majority of your local elected representatives to pass that statute or reverse that statute, that's called representative democracy. That is our form of government. Now, I don't like a lot of laws, but I have to follow them. Otherwise, there's consequences. I have every right to try and change them at the local or state level through what I just said.
The right for any citizen to appear before their local city or town council and be heard could be considered to be an enactment of the right to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Sure, town hall meetings, I don't know of any local community outside of COVID where city council meetings, local city council meetings, or local mayoral meetings or town hall meetings aren't open to the public. And there's always in there a time set aside for the public to ask questions or complain, if you will. But you're not guaranteed the result, because Mark, if you had 100 people that had wanted to deal with the disabled automobile in your front yard differently, you'd have 100 sets of laws. That is where representative government comes into play, and the majority rules. That's the system. It's always been the system. I don't know if it always will be. But as we sit here now, that is.
And the system, in my experience, more often than not, really doesn't work in favor of the citizens. I can cite countless occasions of town councils and school districts who take input from the community, and the input from the community overwhelmingly says, we want you to do X, and then the governing body does Y. And so I would say that the First Amendment is still a weak amendment. That clause is still weak because the will of the citizen has still not been effective in changing the course of the governing body, which is supposed to represent the will of the people.
You're right. That does happen a lot, where the people go in, they say, hey, town council, change this. Town council says no. But then an election comes up and you have a right to vote them out of office. To me, that is the ultimate redress, is the ballot box.
When I vote out clown A and vote in clown B, nothing changes.
That's a different show. This is the Sovereign Citizen show. as it seems to me to have been established over time, it's being generally accepted for 250 years, is the ultimate redress of grievances is indeed the ballot box at the local, state, and federal level.
Let's take that as your final word. Let's move on to another legitimate grievance, something that sticks in my craw, as it were, is the appropriation of the grand jury by the bureaucracy and the autocratic prosecutorial discretion. Now, James, most people don't know that prior to the mid 20th century, grand juries were fully empowered investigative bodies, and they could investigate government officials, they could investigate private citizens. It was truly a body composed of the people and worked on behalf of the people to root out corruption in government. We don't have that anymore. We have bureaucrats, some of them elected, some of them not, who decide who and when will be prosecuted.
The grand jury is a secretly impaneled grand jury of local citizens where the prosecutor can make their case against a defendant for the right to bring charges, and the prosecution gets to call witness. It's like a preliminary hearing, but in secret.
Or as I call it, a star chamber.
A star chamber. And you don't have a right to have an attorney there, and you also cannot invoke your Fifth Amendment. You must answer the questions. And as a 1970s politician most famously said, a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich.
I consider this to be a legitimate grievance of the sovereign citizen movement. It's certainly something that has shifted power and accountability from the people into the bureaucracy, and it is a contributing factor to the symptoms of government overreach that we all deal with on a daily basis. Now, the final thing we'll talk about is the design flaw in the lien process. Now, a lien is where you go into your county office and file a piece of paper that says this person owes me X number of dollars and I'm going to lay claim to their mobile home because of that. The problem with this is that they're entirely unverified. The person who's had the lien filed against them is presumed guilty until proven innocent. They have to go to court and prove that this lien is not valid. And so this is a favorite trick of sovereign citizens because they'll go to your local government official who's simply doing their job, the local county clerk, for example. They'll file a lien against the county clerk because they don't believe in the philosophies that the county clerk is enacting through the role of their job. And now that county clerk has to deal with this lien filed by this sovereign citizen. It certainly illuminates a weakness in the lien process that you are presumed guilty until innocent. Now, many states, as a result of sovereign citizens, have made it a felony to knowingly file a false lien, but they haven't fixed the process of being able to file a false lien.
Right. Well, the only way to do that, you have to wait for a crime to be committed to prosecute the crime. And you can't take away the lien system altogether because the lien system is a way for people to redress grievances if they've been injured, like through a bad contractor.
Right, but more often than not, it works in the opposite, in that the contractor will file a lien against your house after he absconds with the money that you paid him to build your house that he didn't build.
So again, this is yet another example of the sovereign citizens finding these things that were kind of set up to benefit the average citizen, but then they use them to jam up the whole system.
Exactly. Let's take a break and come back with the conclusion of Citizen Sovereign. JacobinBrothers.com is the one and only place to find Jacobin Brothers content. Register at JacobinBrothers.com to gain access to all published episodes and bonus materials. Also included with your free membership to JacobinBrothers.com is Mark's blog, cartoons, quips, and Jacobinisms. Gain access to the Jacobin catalog, which includes hundreds of episodes from shows past and present. Discover what you've been missing at JacobinBrothers.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. Ain't actually is in the dictionary, but you still should not say it. Moore's Law has not been tested in the Supreme Court. Element 115 is found on Gilligan's Island of instability. Is this thing on? JacobinBrothers.com. Welcome back to Truth and Other Lies, Citizen Sovereign. We've told you what a sovereign citizen is or believes themselves to be. We've told you how they came to be in the United States of America. By the way, this is also a global phenomenon. You can find many examples of it in the UK as well as other developed nations. What's the end result of being a sovereign citizen? Why do they do this? What do they get out of it? And some of them put an awful lot of work into filing motions and putting together paperwork and researching case law and finding statutes. What do they really get out of it? And all they really get out of it in the end is they think they can get out of traffic tickets. They think that they can get out of paying their income taxes, and they think that they can get out of their debts, their credit card debt or their mortgages, either by having them discharged through these paper tricks or simply by having them declared invalid. The end result of being a sovereign citizen is that for the most part, they're simply trying to get out of the commitments that they put themselves into. They committed to that credit card. They committed to that mortgage. You are bound to pay income taxes, whether you like it or not. And so, James, to me, it just seems like they're trying to get out of their responsibilities.
Well, I think that's what it is, because the Constitution is set up with rights and responsibilities for all the parties. As a citizen, you have numerous rights, but you also have responsibilities. The biggest one is you need to live within the law. The biggest one. Otherwise, we have chaos and anarchy, period.
One of the tactics of the sovereign citizens is that they like to distort statutory and case law. Here's an example. From the Yick Wo versus Hopkins case of 1886 that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts, and the law is the definition and limitation of power. This is one of their gospel scriptures, as it were, where they derive their power as sovereign citizen, right? The Supreme Court said that you as the person have sovereignty. But what's implied by the whole system, and it's not clearly stated here, is that the individual person is not sovereign. It is the will of the people that represents the sovereignty, not you or I having the ability to override the federal government with our own individual sovereignty.
Right. What's implied is what was established by the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, is that we're not subjects, right? That the people as a whole retain sovereignty amongst to themselves, not to a monarch. And the word sovereign is from the old Latin word to mean above. The Queen of England is above you. It does not mean that you are above the Constitution or you are above the country. It simply means the will of the people is above the government that we elect. That's all it means in layman's terms.
Sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, which means we have said, for the purposes of law and order and public services, we are going to delegate our sovereign powers to you. But nowhere in the Constitution or any statute does it say any one individual has the right to revoke that sovereignty on an individual case-by-case basis.
No, as a matter of fact, in Article 6 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause states clearly that everyone born in America or on American soil is an American citizen. That's it, period. And the only way to renounce that citizenship is you have to go overseas and stand in front of an American ambassador or emissary, sign a piece of paper, and say, I no longer want to be an American citizen. That's the only way to do it. That's the original deal. The sovereign citizens also say they don't recognize the Constitution. They recognize the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation govern the 13 colonies up until they became states, and we replaced it with the Constitution. So again, the sovereign citizen is cherry picking. We don't want to follow the Constitution. We'll follow this document before the Constitution. Now, if we were to write another Constitution today, they would then say, well, I'm not following this one. I'm going to go follow that one. Let's play the sovereign citizen movement out to its conclusion. If there is no United States of America, and there is no rule or no law that says I have to do anything whatsoever that any government entity tells me to do, then you would have 330 million people that could shoot their neighbor in the face, that could rape their neighbor, that could steal from their neighbor, and then simply say, I am not subject to the laws of the United States. If we put the sovereign citizens on an island amongst themselves, you would have the Lord of the Flies. And then what would happen is someone would say, okay, let's make a rule. No murder. Okay, let's make another rule. No rape. And then slowly but surely, you'd create a society. And that society would have to have a government. and the government entity then down the road would ensure the rights and safety of the citizen. The only reason the sovereign citizen movement can exist is because the United States of America does exist. Because if there was no United States of America, no American government, no constitution, no declaration, if that wasn't there, right, then they would have nothing to argue with. Because what they say is, we're not subject to any of this, any of these conditions that you, the government, the Constitution has placed upon us. But if not that, then what? And this is the question that they won't answer. They're almost like children. They're raging against a machine, but they can only do that because the machine exists.
They have a number of logical fallacies that they put into their arguments and are easily struck down. One of them is the burden of proof fallacy, is that they will make a declaration about how the laws don't apply to them, and then they will say, well, it's your job to prove that this law doesn't apply to me. See, and I've looked through all of these IRS regulations, and I've looked up through all of these Code of Federal Regulations book, and I can't find anywhere the government says that this is wrong, where it disputes me. Well, of course it doesn't dispute you, because you're claiming that the Easter Bunny is real, and nowhere in the IRS code does it address the existence of the Easter Bunny.
Since we're talking about fairy tales, Santa Claus. Here's what they get in their stocking: a $630,000 secret treasury account, the right not to pay bills, the right not to pay taxes, the right not to have a driver's license, the right not to have to appear in court or serve on jury duty. Wow, who wouldn't want that? Except for jury duty. I want to serve on jury duty. Here's where these people are going to do a lot more harm than good, because they're about to become famous. With the current American political situation, there's a lot of fringe groups in the last few years, from the left and the right, have come into the mainstream. And now in the political cycle, the way it is, with the stereotypical, prototypical sovereign citizen being who they are, they're about to be injected into the American mainstream. And the damage that's going to do is this: people like myself who put on this show, people like the people who listen to this show, there's a certain few things that we like and understand and accept. We want the rights promised to us under the Constitution. We accept the responsibilities. We work within the system. Right? I myself personally feel that every single thing that's in the Constitution, those are all the rights you need. They did a very good job of writing that document. Right? So these people are going to come in with this word salad, manipulative, grifter con artist act, and they're going to start to confuse what an actual right of the citizen is compared with this, whatever you want to call it. It's going to muddy the waters.
It's a grift. You nailed it on the head. There is nothing legitimate about the sovereign citizens movement in their actions or their intentions. Like I said, they do have legitimate grievances, but the way that they're attempting to resolve those grievances are not legitimate, either within the frame of the established government structure or within the frame of a citizen operating within a free state.
A lot of us have legitimate grievances. Timothy McVeigh had a legitimate grievance that the federal government most likely overstepped their bounds in Waco, Texas. Correct?
Correct.
The way he chose to do that was to murder people, to include 20 children, and he called them collateral damage. That is the danger of this. As a country, we can survive on Timothy McVeigh. He went through the same court system that he didn't recognize. He was given a jury of his peers. He was given the right to cross-examination. He was found guilty. He was given the death penalty, and he was executed. But if we had tens of thousands of Timothy McVeighs who have a legitimate grievance, that go and blow up federal buildings and daycare centers, then you've got chaos and anarchy. The idea that they have a legitimate grievance, they do, but they're taking legitimate grievances that we all share, right? Like, we all think we're taxed too much, Mark. We all think there's too many regulations on everything. But what we don't get to do is go down and blow up City Hall in response to that.
You've been listening to Truth and Other Lies.